Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are taking one of those documents that looks like dense legal homework and turning it into something you can actually use.
Yeah, some actionable intelligence.
Exactly. We are strapping in for a deep dive into really the absolute bedrock of any large-scale project,
Yeah.
the contracts that decide who's on the hook for what permit.
Right.
Our source material is this document. It's labeled Employer Requirement E2.112, and it basically sets the rules of the game for permitting between, a big employer and their contractor.
On a massive project, yeah.
And our mission here is to really unpack that division of labor. It's not just about who gets what permit, but it's about understanding the strategy, the transfer of risk, and that huge administrative burden.
This document is just a masterclass in how an employer outsources compliance. And, if you're a project manager or a contractor and you open this thing up, you are immediately hit with a hurdle that basically dictates your entire staffing plan. What's really fascinating is that the requirement states, right at the top, the required language for pretty much everything, permitting, docs, communication, is the language of the country.
Which is?
Specifically defined as Dutch.
Wow. Let's unpack that for a second. That's a huge constraint right out of the gate. So this isn't just, hire a translator for the final paperwork.
Not at all.
It's about making sure your actual personnel, the people doing the work, making the submissions, talking to local authorities, they have to be completely fluent.
Fully able to speak and write in Dutch. It's a massive, non-negotiable hurdle that hits you the minute you sign.
Think about the legal exposure there.
Oh, absolutely. Permitting is a conversation,
Yep.
right? It's often a negotiation with regulators.
Yeah.
By mandating Dutch fluency, the employer just eliminates the risk of a miscommunication, a mistranslation, anything ambiguous that could derail the project. And crucially, they're pushing all the accountability for that perfect communication right onto the contractor's payroll.
It sets the tone immediately. This is going to be hyper-specific. So let's start with that fundamental split, the great permit divide. According to Section 1.1, how do they establish who's responsible for what?
The core principle is, it's written to maximize the contractor's exposure, really.
Oh, so.
The contractor is responsible for obtaining all required permits, licenses, consents, approvals, everything, unless the document explicitly says otherwise.
So the default is it's the contractor's problem.
Exactly. The baseline assumption is everything falls to the contractor unless the employer specifically takes it off their plate.
That feels like a massive catch-all, but I assume the employer keeps the big strategic approvals, right? The ones that decide if the project can even exist.
Precisely. They hang on to what we're calling the big three in Section 2. These are the foundation stones. And the employer keeps control because, they're crucial for the project's viability for the financing.
Okay, so tell us what those big three are.
First, you have the building permit. That's for the physical construction of the works. Second is the environmental permit, also for the construction phase, defines the project's footprint. And then third, you have the operations permit, which is for the safe and legal operation of the whole thing once it's finished.
So the employer handles the macro level stuff, the right to build, the right to operate. These are sort of fixed elements. But that leaves the contractor with just this vast shifting landscape of tactical approvals.
And that's where the administrative floodgates just open wide. The contractor has to get all other required permits. And just to give you, the listener, a feel for the sheer volume.
Yeah, give us some examples.
We're talking about things like temporary utility hookups, getting approvals for a traffic diversion, maybe specific noise exemptions for night work, water discharge licenses, even just permission to store certain materials on site.
That is a huge list of granular, often overlapping tasks. And it's not just permits, is it? They also handle formal announcements.
Yes, that's a key point. The document makes the contractor manage all these formal notifications, environmental notifications, construction notifications, all sorts of others. So it's not just seeking permission. It's executing the whole communication plan that the employer's core permits require.
And this is where it stops being just a list and starts becoming, organizational pain. Because it's not enough for them to say who gets the permit. They dictate how the contractor has to run their entire compliance operation.
Exactly. Let's shift to that mandatory management framework in Section 4.1. This is the operational burden the contractor has to carry from day one.
What does that look like?
The pressure is immediate, and it's defined by two really crucial mandatory deliverables. First, they have to establish a permits and license management plan.
And that's not just a memo, I'm guessing.
No. It has to detail their entire org structure, the specific activities, planning, timelines, deliverables, communication protocols, and, really importantly, the roles and responsibilities for every single step, including how they manage any changes to the permits.
And the timeline on that sounds brutal.
It is. It has to be submitted to the employer no later than 30 days after the commencement date.
30 days. So they have to hire experts, understand the local regulatory scene, and create a full operational plan basically before they even break ground.
It completely dictates the critical path for that first month,
Yeah.
which, leads directly to the second deliverable personnel.
Right.
The contractor has to appoint an experienced permit manager.
Yeah.
And this role,
Yeah.
this is the sharp end of that Dutch fluency requirement we talked about.
So the language rule is explicitly tied to this person. But, let me challenge that for a second. Couldn't they just use a certified translation firm for the documents? Why does the manager have to be fluent?
That is a great question, and it goes right to the heart of risk management. A translation firm can translate text, sure, but the permit manager needs to understand the legal nuance. They have to negotiate conditions, respond to questions during a site visit.
All in real time.
All in the local language, yeah. The employer is demanding a cultural and regulatory fluency that really only native capability can guarantee. It protects them from any liability that comes from a delay or a misinterpretation.
That makes perfect sense. The cost of a language barrier on a project this size is just.
Yeah.
It's way more than the cost of specialized staff.
And this manager isn't working in a silo, right? They're in constant contact with the employer.
Constantly. The contractor's permit manager has to have regular, specifically bi-weekly meetings with the employer's rep just to go over the status of the permit register.
Bi-weekly?
And here's the interesting power dynamic. The contractor has to propose the agenda and take the minutes. They are driving the whole administrative process. The employer just reviews and maintains oversight.
This whole structure, it forces the contractor to be perpetually accountable, not just for their own permits, but for complying with all the conditions inside the employer's permits too, the building, the environmental. That's it. They are the operational compliance arm. The contractor has to fulfill all terms and conditions in the permits obtained by the employer. That means preparing things like detailed working plans, notifications for regulatory milestones, site-specific calamity plans, all stemming from approvals the employer got.
Which brings us to the centerpiece of all this, the document that holds it all together.
Oh.
The permit register. This is the ultimate tracking tool detailed in sections 4.3 and 4.4.
It is the absolute heart of compliance, and it's designed to be a living, breathing document. It's established and maintained by the contractor, agreed on by the employer, and this is critical. It has to be accessible to the employer at all times.
At all times. So total transparency.
No secrets, no delays in an audit.
The source doc is incredibly granular about what this register has to contain. Let's walk the listener through some of those specifics.
Okay, so there are several mandatory pieces that make this way more than just a simple list. First, obviously, you have a listing of all required permits, both theirs and the employer's.
Okay.
Second, and this is so important for risk transfer, it requires a listing of all requirements in full text included in those permits.
Full text. Why that specific mandate? Why not just a summary of the conditions?
That is a very strategic move by the employer. A summary can be subjective, right? It could let the contractor maybe minimize or interpret a requirement in a way that helps their schedule.
I see.
By demanding the full text, the employer ensures perfect auditable clarity. It basically prevents the contractor from ever saying, oh, we didn't realize it meant that.
Yeah.
There's no plausible deniability.
So the goal is total auditability. What about the tracking? How do they make sure deadlines are actually met?
They specify the minimum items for tracking status. So for each requirement you have, the name of the permit, the specific requirement from the full text, the action to be taken, the due date, the status, and a reference showing how it was fulfilled.
It turns compliance into a measurable, traceable process.
Like a manufacturing process, exactly. And to link this back to the schedule, the register must also include a detailed time program.
A time program for what, specifically?
For every single application, an agreed detailed time program is mandatory. It has to include review times, issuance dates, and identify the key people responsible. This effectively grafts the entire regulatory approval timeline directly onto the master project schedule.
So any slip in permitting immediately flags as a project delay.
Instantly. And if things go wrong or if requirements change mid-construction, they have to be tracked just as meticulously.
And this brings us to what you called the most powerful long-term liability tool in the document.
The mandatory deviation register. This is not a suggestion. It's a requirement inside the permit register. It has to track all modifications, any changes to permit requirements, all mitigation measures, and critically, all is built information.
This is where compliance becomes more like continuous quality control, isn't it? It's the employer's insurance policy.
That's spot on. The deviation register ensures that the physical building, as it's actually built, aligns perfectly with the legal permissions, which can change over time.
If you connect that to the bigger picture.
It's what protects the project's legal status long after the contractor is gone. If regulators audit the project years later, there's a clear, traceable history of every single adjustment they had to make.
Okay, let's shift gears to interaction. The employer doesn't just trust the contractor to talk to regulatory bodies on their own. Section 4.2 has really strict communication rules.
Oh, yeah. This is a clear sign of the control the employer wants over the external narrative. So, while the contractor is responsible for contacting all the parties for their permits, they are obliged to inform the employer in advance anytime they're contacting a relevant authority.
Informing them in advance, that's a subtle but massive mandate. Why is that specific timing so critical?
It's all about controlling the message. It gives the employer a chance to, quote, provide reasonable assistance. But really, it's to make sure the contractor isn't accidentally creating problems or making commitments that conflict with the employer's broader strategy. They want to preempt any regulatory friction.
And to really nail down that control, they demand access to every single conversation.
Exactly. The employer must be invited by the contractor to all meetings with authorities. They want a seat at every table where risk is discussed. They never want to be surprised by a request or a commitment. And it's time sensitive, too. The contractor has to respond quickly to requests from both the authorities and the employer.
Okay, we've got the division of labor, the admin process, the communication rules. Let's talk about the final split. The money. Who pays for all this complexity?
The cost split is pretty straightforward, but it really highlights the financial burden that gets shifted. Costs for the employer's permits, the building, environmental, and operations permits are paid for by the employer.
So the application fees for the big three.
Right.
And what about the rest? The hundreds of other little permits the contractor has to manage and staff and track?
The costs for obtaining all other permits, licenses, and approvals are borne entirely by the contractor. And that means not just the fees, but the significant internal costs of staffing, training, and maintaining that whole management plan and the biweekly reporting. The employer pays for 3 permits, the contractor pays for and manages everything else.
Okay, let's circle back and just summarize the core insight here for you, the listener. What the employer has done is it's a masterclass in shifting risk. They secure the huge project permissions, building, environmental operations, but they have successfully transferred the intense, continuous, day-to-day compliance burden and all the financial risk that comes with it completely to the contractor.
And that transfer is embodied in all these specifics we've been talking about.
Yeah.
The need for Dutch fluency, the rigorous tracking through biweekly meetings, and just the sheer administrative weight of maintaining that exhaustive, always-on permit register.
And if we connect this all back to the project's legacy, the documentation, specifically that deviation register, that's arguably the most critical long-term responsibility the contractor takes on.
Absolutely. The deviation register forces them to track every single change, every modification, every as-built detail. It serves as the employer's ultimate legal protection after construction. It's a clear statement that compliance isn't just a construction phase task. It's a meticulous, continuous process that protects the project for years to come.
Fascinating stuff. We took a dense document and pulled out the critical strategy behind it. So here's a final thought for you to chew on. Given that requirement for an agreed detailed time program inside the permit register, with all the reviews and issuance dates baked in, how much flexibility do you think the contractor actually has in their overall project schedule once that program is submitted and agreed to? Just think about that level of pre-commitment.
If you're interested in the templates, please visit our shop. The link is in the description.
Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and see next time.